Uh, if people are having issues with audio or the video, kindly leave a message in the chat box. Uh, you know, this is an interface that we still are getting used to, and there are so many variables here that doesn't seem to, be easily coming under one's control. So, yeah, so without further ado, if there are any issues, do leave a message in the chat box. I hope you're able to see and hear me loud and clear. A very warm welcome from Intach Nilgiris. My name is Krishna, the convener of Intach Nilgiris. I'm also joined by two of my colleagues, Ms. Geeta Srinivasan, the mentor and patron of Intach Nilgiris, and Samantha Ayana, who's the co-convener. So a very warm welcome to this, I would imagine, a very important talk. Um, the churches of Nilgiris and understanding its histories and and generally speaking the Christian heritage of the Nilgiris. See, for example, now when you're talking about a place like you look at any of the places in the Kaveri Delta, Tanjavur, Trichy, Kumbakonam, what is the thing which comes to everybody's mind is actually temples. You go to Trichy, you go to Kumbakonam or any of the places, Swamimalai, in and around the Tanjavur Delta. So temples is something which which is so intrinsic to its identity. So similarly, if you look at the Nilgiris, this is something not many people realize. But if you look at matters a bit more carefully, um, churches, and Nilgiris, they cannot really be separated from one another. There's so much intrinsic to the culture and identity of Nilgiris today. And that's one of the reasons why we thought that, this has to be brought to a much larger understanding and brought to people's attention. So people, when they come to Nilgiris, usually they're coming for its flora and fauna. They're coming to soak in the spectacular landscape and the vistas that these hills are gifted with. But not many people really look at Nilgiris as a cultural center too. So, there are a lot of these misconceptions. You come to a hill station basically for its natural beauty. But from the talk we did last time on colonial Nilgiris, where Dr. Vasantan specifically spoke about Kunur, there is so much of history here, so much of culture and heritage here. It is just not all flora and fauna and scenery and grasslands and forests. There are people here, and the people, they go back to eons, to centuries, and it's a very in terms of culture, it's very, very composite. There are people of different faiths and different ethnicities living here, and this needs to be brought to popular attention, and people need to get some idea about the culture and the sociology and anthropology of Nilgiris. So in that context, we have this theme on churches, churches of Nilgiris. And so we have a very important person to talk about it, Reverend Philip Mulley. I am really privileged and honored to host him today for this very special talk. To introduce Reverend Mulley, in short, you are probably meeting the most erudite man in the hills. He's of course a clergyman, a man of the church, but he's also an excellent, an outstanding sociologist, historian, folklorist. I consider him as a walking encyclopedia on the Nilgiris, and so it's really our great fortune to have him and have him talk about the churches. Like I said, he's a clergyman and he has retired from the church now, but he still keeps himself active in different ways. But he's very much an active scholar. He still writes and contributes a lot to to Nilgiris scholarship. So Reverend Mulley, he like I said, there is so much I can, be talking about him. So I'll just stop myself with so many words. And I also, before I hand over the mantle to Reverend Mulley, let's also keep this in mind. This talk is going to be it's not meant to be very comprehensive because I assisted Reverend Mulley in preparation of this talk. It's not going to be identifying each and every church in the Nilgiris. It is more a talk which is going to give us some kind of a framework or a perspective to understand the churches here, and also its legacy to Nilgiri culture and to Nilgiri's identity. So kindly bear that in mind. It's not really going to be a talk where we are going to be merely sharing facts and details. I think that is something we can all access with on the internet, thanks to Google. So the idea is more to develop a perspective or a framework to understand and locate these churches here, and rather than listing them in certain disembodied and discrete way. So with these few words, I now request Reverend Mulley to get going with his talk. And Reverend Mulley, I hope you're ready at your end.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Krishna, I think, for your over generous words of introduction.
Hardly.
And I also thank the Nilgiri Intach, Mrs. Geeta Srinivasan, and Dr. R.S. Krishna, who is our coordinator, and also Samantha Ayana. I also wish to thank Faisal and Ranjani, who have helped us at certain points of time in trying to make this presentation. I think I may only offer several caveats as far as the presentation and its purpose is concerned, rather than a comprehensive history. Comprehensive history of the Nilgiri churches and Christian institutions, I think, has not been part of our agenda as such. So I think with this brief caveat, I think we'll go ahead. Ooty being the headquarters of the Nilgiris, people who, whatever categories from which they come, they regard St. Stephen's Church as an example of whatever the British really brought up to Nilgiris by way of their religious affiliation. Now, I want to say a few things on that. I think we'll have a look at the St. Stephen's Church, which is, before that, I think we have, the church plan and, things like that from Wikipedia. We need to realize that these details from other sources, they're okay academically. But otherwise, to say that the Nilgiris churches followed whatever was obtained in Europe regarding the church architecture, I think it's not really proper. It's not really a proper perspective, because I mean this is fine for a model, but then let us look at St. Stephen's Church, which is the first Christian place of worship in the Nilgiris, and established by the English. Of course, this is the outside the gate, which originally was called the benchmark of the district. The benchmark, of course, many of you may know, is a site from where all the trigonometric measurements of the districts were taken. So this was called the benchmark stone, but the highways people now have a milestone. So this, if not the milestone, but somewhere, I think we need to mention that, they chose some very crucial sites to have their church built. And so St. Stephen's, this benchmark stone, and behind is the St. Stephen's Church. And to put it very, very briefly, I think this was originally known as the Flagstaff Hill. The whole establishment in and around St. Stephen's, and the original road from Sigur, not the present day Kalati Ghat, the original road from Sigur actually came and it wound up at the place where now the St. Stephen's Church lies. So it came via the older road through Badaga village, Kalati and Kavarati, and then Marlimand, and then it reached what is now the collectorate. So this is just for minor information. Anyway, so they decided to build a church here. So since it was called Flagstaff Hill, for all the British administrators making a trip to Nilgiris, so this place was chosen. Well, see, it is said to be an abandoned Thoda site, but I think most of the sites in Ooty town and elsewhere, they are always abandoned sites. So there's no special sanctity needs to be attached to such things. Badaga traditions also confirmed that this was a Thoda site, and the whole of Ooty was there. So there's no particular point in highlighting that. But then the church, as you see, we don't know when was this picture taken. This is very, very important. When was this picture taken? We do not know. Normally, according to our records, the church came into use in 1831. But in 1831, it was just not like this. That we need to remind ourselves. I think they never bothered about all those medieval Western architectural style and things like that. So the church was there since 1831, and subsequently it was extended in 1851 and 1858 and again in 1887. So the church probably comes from a period later to 1887. So the picture actually, it is not the church as built in 1831, which we need to remind ourselves. Richard Burton, who was known for his explorations even into the source of river Nile, he notes in his book, and he very interestingly says, this is an unpraisable erection in Saxo-Gothic style. So certainly the church was not the same as you see in 1831. And also we have official records from Madras stating that the designs were not properly made and the contractor was literally, a lot of resentment went on between the contractor and when they finally settled the bill. So this came in much later. So probably they never bothered about all those old architectural designs and plans. So definitely this picture is from a much later period, but in 1831 it was not like this. And so I repeat, so it was extended in 1851 and 1858 and finally in 1887. And yeah, this is inside the church. And what is very special about this church, the interior of the church, is that I think there is reliable evidence that all the woodwork that is used in the church, they all came from the Srirangapatnam palace of Tipu Sultan after he was defeated by the British. So I think there was nobody using that place. And so the British, I think, took away all the timber from Srirangapatna. And Captain Underwood, who actually was in charge of the construction, I think he mentions it very clearly in his old notes. So most of the wood. And they also brought wood from Srirangapatna palace to have a school started for the European children. Because the children of Europeans living from as far as South Africa to Australia, they did not have proper educational opportunities in those days. So he brought timber from Srirangapatna, and I think that school was later on closed, and it changed hands to Hotel Savoy, and now I think it is Hotel Taj. So the church is mainly, and so now this portion of the church, we call it an altar. And of course, in medieval Europe, I think there are several kinds of altars and things like that. But in basic Protestant idea, I think the worshippers thought of church in three portions. Number one, Holy of the Holies. Number two, the holy place where the congregations gathered. And number three, the congregations, not only for worship, but also for other purposes, they congregated in one place. So I think that was the original idea among most of the Protestant churches. Though they may have come from traditions relating to these are architectural traditions from medieval times, I think most of them who came to Nilgiris, I think probably they did not have any idea. I think when they came up along with the company as company officials, I think they petitioned to the Governor Lushington. So he, with some alacrity, he said that the church should be constructed. Now, what is interesting is Sullivan was the collector, and though Sullivan was also the collector of Coimbatore, he took greater interest in establishing a Christian congregation there than in Nilgiris. Sullivan never bothered about what happened to Europeans in Ooty or Nilgiris. So it was Stephen Lushington. So when the church was constructed, Captain Underwood, and then, so as customary in those days, the church was named after the person responsible for constructing and taking his Christian name. His Lushington's Christian name was St. Stephen's, and so it was consecrated as St. Stephen's Church. And so these are, the what we call the altar part. And so we have the altar, or which some people may call it, most holy of the holy place, or whatever it is. But here is where from the priest celebrates the sacrament, and the people come and kneel down here, which you call it a communion railing, where they receive the sacrament. And of course, in some places, you can always make a distinction between what is altar, what is chancel on the sides of the altar. What is on the sides of the altar. And then the major portion of the place where people congregated, it was called a nave in a very, very colloquial manner. So these were the three parts originally. And the chancel actually originally was not built in 1831. So as a matter of fact, the chancel's two sides were built with contributions from Mrs. McIver, who was the wife of the one who created the Cinchona plantations. But then, there was a lot of controversy, because the congregation did not want to accept the contributions from Mrs. McIver just like that, because McIver was known to be known to have pocketed his whatever it is, right? He polished his own apples with the money he got from Cinchona plantations. So even in his grave site, the tombstone, which you will see later, he is mentioned only as the superintendent of Cinchona operations. So he is never known as the creator of the government botanical garden. But anyway, beyond all this, I think he did a very, exemplary work. And this is the only what we call the baptismal font. Baptismal font is when children are received into the church. And this was built by the descendants of John Sullivan. So this is important. So he built, because his wife died here and a child. And so in memory of them, he built this baptismal font and presented it to the church. This is the only link John Sullivan has with this baptismal site. And so these are the stained glass windows. Of course, I don't have time to deal in detail with them. I think some of them were presented by McIver himself and a few others. This again, the interior of the church. And I think it's, again, I see all the woodwork, the excellent woodwork which you see throughout. Not the pews, the benches. It's not called benches, it's called pews. But all the woodwork on the roof and elsewhere were from Tipu Sultan's place. And now this is interesting tubular bells with all their timing apparatus. So you can operate it from down, but you need training. So they are set to a certain hymn or music, and they used to be actually timed at every service on every Sunday. But now there is no more trained person there in the church to do it, but this has its own archival value. Yeah, this is from the where the bells are set, and this is the bottom place. Yes. Yeah. And now coming to these so-called memorial plaques. Number one, we need to remind ourselves that the memorial plaques, though many of them were related to members who worshipped in the churches, not all of them were intimately connected with the church. So we have about, according to our own record, about 7,500 entries in our burial registers. Kotagiri, Kunur, and Ooty, excluding Gudalur. But certainly not all, no, we don't have as many memorial plaques. So the memorial plaques were actually provided for by people who could afford to do it in those days. So even if they had had no connection with the church intimately, they always provided memorial plaques for many of those people who were close to them and things like that. And I think when we come to a few plaques in the Kunur church, we'll talk more about it. And the memorial plaques, the church did not have any control over this memorial plaque as such, because whoever contributed, and then if everything is fine, they were accepted and they were put inside the churches, these brass memorial plaques or these marble ones. And now this is the famous St. Stephen's Church cemetery, just behind the church. Now you can see the church that's on the western side, and this is behind. So we have records of all the cemeteries, no doubt about it. But then, many people don't realize that on the western flank of St. Stephen's Church, which we don't show it here, there are actually scores and scores of burials of Tamil Christians, which nobody bothers about them these days, because Stephen's Church was considered, a very, very high English-speaking church. Anyway, so that's part of the story of the cemeteries. Now, and we will again go into a few of the tomb sites, because not all of them who had lived here and buried here are important in that sense, right? And just like the memorial plaques and the church had no jurisdiction, on the tombstones also, no. Whoever wanted to build, I think they had to simply apply to the church authorities and they were built. So sometimes the epitaphs are excellent and sometimes you just don't make out anything out of it and things like that. But anyway, there are a few burial stones or few tombstones which we need to have a look at St. Stephen's Church Cemetery. Incidentally, people seem to think that St. Stephen's Church is the oldest European cemetery, which is not true. So the oldest European cemetery is in Kotagiri. The Kotagiri European cemetery is the oldest one, going back to 1829 of one Crittenden, who was a judge of Trichinopoli. And then the next oldest one goes back to the Stonehouse Hill Cemetery, where we have two burials. But again, so from the dates you can imagine St. Stephen's Church was still not built. So this St. Stephen's Church, strictly speaking, is not the oldest European cemetery. Now, this tombstone belongs to, this is Maccabeus, the famous creator of the botanical garden. I've already made a mention about him, yes. And this is a very interesting tombstone of G.J. George J. Casa Mayer, not Major, Casa Mayer. You see, he retired as judge of the appellate court in Chennai in those days. High court was not in existence. And Casa Mayer and many of his relatives I think they did very pioneering company service in Chennai also. You have a Kasamaya Road in Chennai. And interestingly, he belongs to, he is of Spanish royal extraction, long domiciled in UK. And then he actually did not worship here regularly. But then I want to tell you also that, see, when these churches, when they had their cemeteries, they were meant to be open for all Europeans, irrespective of their religious affiliation. So on that condition only, the sites were approved. So Casa Mayor, I think he was, there is no time. He was the one who established the great work among Badagas in KT, and all lots of things. I think I don't spend much time on that. So he was buried here because he was an European. So the place was there. But actually, he did not want to have his graveside in KT. Actually, because he did so much for the Badagas. So he himself wrote that, I am overwhelmed, but at the same time, I do not want my gravesite to be made a shrine by the Badagas. So I need to be buried elsewhere. So they brought him here and buried him here, Casa Maya. He lived in KT from 1846.
Bricks.
This is the gravesite of Briggs. Briggs was the first commissioner of Nilgiris. First commissioner of Nilgiris. So the first independent administrator for Nilgiris. So the district was not actually separated from Coimbatore, but then he was made the first commissioner because there was a lot of arguments were going on in those days whether Nilgiris should be included in Malabar or in Coimbatore. And then I think just to divert the implications of those controversies, he was made the first commissioner, and as many of us know, he was the first pioneering archaeologist of Nilgiris. He was the son-in-law of the governor William Denison. And of course, William Denison, I don't want to say anything about him now, but William Denison was the one, I think, who helped the Basel German Mission set up an European loom in KT, and I think it expanded the economic opportunities of Badagas to a very great extent. Anyway, that's a different story. So William Denison's son-in-law was Briggs. Holy Trinity Church, this is the site. The site was set apart for a Tamil school in Ooty to serve as a school during the weekdays and to serve as a place of worship on Sundays. This was actually established in the year 1844 by Archdeacon Harper, who was the chaplain of St. Stephen's Church, Ooty. Now, Tamil school, though it sounds very simple, I think these missionaries who were running, they were also Anglicans from Church of England, but from a missionary society. Unlike the other European churches, which were administered by different kinds of people. But these missionaries, they introduced Tamil literacy in the district. Because by the time the migration from Tamil Nadu had reached such a peak, so these missionaries of the Church Missionary Society, they actually introduced Tamil literacy. I think Kannada literacy was introduced by the Basel German missionaries among Badagas. But then when these increasing Tamil migrations came to take place, I think these schools did a very, very pioneering mission. 1844. Yeah, this plaque relating to the church, and this is inside the church. And, this again is called an altar, not so elaborate as the St. Stephen's one. But since I have served here, I want to make a personal mention of something very interesting. So on a clear day, right, in the Anglican tradition, for the creed, when the Nicene Creed is sung, we turn towards the altar and not towards the people. Because as a priest, you represent the people, and so all of us turn towards God, and when we recite the Nicene Creed. And many times I have seen you turn to the altar to recite the creed, and it was a plain open window. I think the present one you have is a very recent one with the cross embossed on it. So on a clear day, you can see Mukurti Peak, the view, such an excellent view of Mukurti Peak. And so, it faces towards west, though in many places they say the church should always place east. I mean, yeah, this is, yeah, and this is inside the church, yeah, of Holy Trinity. This is All Saints Church. All Saints Church in Coonoor, which actually came in a little later than St. Stephen's Church. The All Saints Church was actually initiated by one Reverend Fennell, who was acting as a chaplain of Coonoor also. He used to visit Coonoor regularly. And then General Kennett, who had retired to Coonoor from Bangalore, he first donated a strip of land for the church to be established. The whole church and the whole church site is not a donation from him, but only a portion of it. And the rest of the property belonged to the Basel German mission, who were working among Badagas and who had their own mission house in Coonoor for the missionaries to stay, but they did not undertake any work. Of course, later on they undertook some other work, especially among all the laborers on the tea plantation. So that's a different story. And this place was originally, the Basel German place was originally the site of Collector Thomas of Coimbatore, who later on sold it to the Basel Mission, and portions of it were later on sold to one Captain Bedford, and so after him is named the Bedford Corner or Bedford Circle in Coonoor. Yeah, this is the altar, and only here, they have a. Now this is very clear. There's an altar at the back, and then the portion next to it, in front of you, is called a chancel. A chancel is the place where the choir used to be seated, along with other officiating clergy, and different designs. And of course, this design came from, I think they directly imported this chancel curtain, though in wood. It's called chancel curtain from UK. So this is the main altar, and the stained glass there. It was not originally part of the All Saints Church structure. It was only added later on when the first chaplain of the Wellington, Reverend Taylor, he died falling off from his horse, and so in his memory, this altar stained glass were presented by his admirers. And these are some of the very beautiful stained glass um, glasses, stained glass appearances you have inside the church. And I especially wish to point out, St. Alban, who is at the top, carrying a balance. And then St. Alban was the first martyred saint of England. As far as I know, I think there is no special stained glass figure in honor of St. Alban anywhere in India. I'm not sure. But then this is St. Alban. And of course, the other one is St. Alban, and then St. George, and then another stained glass window, St. Michael's. I think it got broken when the stained glasses were imported from France. A very interesting and very poignant thing about the stained glasses is they were all designed in France. They were all designed in France, and by the time the architect could complete his work, he lost his business. But then, very interestingly, he also completed his work without making any further claims on the church. So that's very, very, very poignant, but very interesting fact. So this is inside also in church. So all the woodworks, they were mainly from India. I think a major portion of the woodwork came from the old railway workshops in Trichrapalli. And so this is a pipe organ. Pipe organ, which is very famous. You see, we don't have a pipe organ in St. Stephen's, though it is claimed to the oldest church. Actually, one organ they had it, they sold it to the Roman Catholics, even in the 19th century itself. So this pipe organ, again, is imported from UK and is installed and even to this day used. Now there are again, these planks and memorial plots and these marble stones. So this is in remembrance of Sir Frederick Nicholson, who is the father of the cooperative movement in the then Madras presidency, which also included Andhra. And he was a father, and also he initiated the agricultural small credit scheme in those days. And he was the first one to edit the famous Coimbatore District Gazetteers, 4 volumes of it. So he lived in Coonoor, and then he died there. So he is buried in a cemetery attached to All Saints Church, not in the churchyard itself. So he is commemorated here. And this is a beautiful view of the churchyard. We make a difference when the burial places are inside the church premises, we call them churchyard. When they're outside, they are called cemeteries. So this is not a cemetery, this is a churchyard. So very beautifully maintained even to this day by All Saints Church. And so we just want to mention the 2 most prominent ones here. They belong to Bishop Jell, who was a bishop of Madras for the longest number of years in the East, for more than 40 years, and his sister, who was unmarried. So they settled down in Coimbatore after retirement. And Bishop Jell always used to claim that All Saints Church is the only pretty jewel in his diocese. And later on, they bequeathed, made a huge bequest to Christian education work and the present day Jell Memorial School in Ooty for girls. I think it was built with that funds. Though originally the work there was started by one Catherine Ling, a missionary to the Todas, but actually the money for her to build up these institutions mainly came from these funds. And this is the gravesite of General Kennett, who did donate a small part of his land, that he was prepared to help. And so, unfortunately, he was killed by an Afghan moneylender, and then so he lies here. So this is the gravesite of Lieutenant General Kennett. And Lieutenant General Kennett also, in those days, I think, took very great interest. And he was actually, in addition to Sullivan, he was also trying to do a lot of pioneering horticulture work among Badagas, but then he failed. And this is the cemetery attached to All Saints Church, which is called Tiger Hill Cemetery. So when the churchyard was full in the 1920s, I think they built this cemetery for the All Saints Church, which later years also came to serve the purposes of the Union English Church. And yes, so some of the memorial stones, for example, you see William Henry Staines. He belonged to the well-known distinguished family of the Staines, Thomas Staines, Robert Staines, and William Henry Staines. Because being Europeans, they were allowed sites there. And actually, they were not Anglicans. They were very staunch Plymouth Brethren, which, those differences I don't want to expand here. But then, being Europeans, they were given places for burial, and also inside the church, memorial plaques. Staines, the famous industrialist of Coimbatore and Kuno. And now this is the gravestone by Albert Thomas Watson Penn, one of the, I think, the pioneering photographer in Ooty. So Penn in Ooty and Bosinga in Kunur of German extraction, they were the original, they originally established themselves as photographers in Nilgiris. Now, see, during their retirement, many missionaries from other places also came to settle down in Kunur, and these graves belong to the family of Addis, W.B. Addis. His wife and his son are buried here. They did not belong to the Anglican Church, Church of England, but they opened up the vast field of missionary work, in Coimbatore district, Coimbatore E Road. So I think the work there in Coimbatore and E Road districts of the London Mission, but not of the Church of England. I think the work was to these missionaries who are buried, who came to settle down in Nilgiris and buried. And incidentally, Addis was also the first printer. He was the first one to establish a press in Nilgiris in those days. Now we come to St. Thomas Church. So when the congregation was growing bigger, especially after the opening of the Suez Canal, and all the fortune makers from England, marching to Nilgiris, I think they found that they needed a new church. So this, you will see, the foundation stone was laid in, I think there's 1867. But then, it was not easy to establish churches just like that in those days, but then I won't go into those details now. So the site for the church was built from Higginbothams of Madras. It was his own site. So the church bought this site and built this church called St. Thomas Church for the expanding European population. And also the cemetery attached to it. Now, again, the pews, what we call the benches, I think they were presented by Governor Lawley of Madras to this church, St. Thomas Church. Now you will find, this altar portion less elaborate than at St. Stephen's. I think there is a story behind it. If you look at the stained glass settings there, you will not find any religious symbol at all except for the Jewish star and designs of flowers. Because at the time of the church being established, see, there was a controversy between, in those days, of the high church folk and the low church folk. Again, that's a big story. The high church were more liturgical and formal and things like that. And the low church folk were more evangelical and outgoing. So there was a huge controversy. And it so happened that this G.U. Pope, the Tamil scholar, he happened to be in Ooty at the time between 1858 and 71. So he kept on fueling controversies because he was a high churchman. So there's an interesting and fascinating story behind it. And so when the church was built, I think no specific religious symbol was chosen to be on the altar. So this is very plain altar. So that's the story behind it. And then, of course, later on, so that was built during and consecrated during the time of one St. Thomas Dealtree. But then someone, I think, who was kind of really, who was not happy with the low church people, I think he wanted to make good, and so he presented the bishop's chair, where you will find a serpent on the bishop's chair's arms. You'll find a serpent. And of course, they continue to say the meaning is that Jesus Christ conquered sin and the serpent, and that's the whole idea behind it. But I think it was deliberately gifted by a donor. So when it was gifted, nobody could deny. Nobody could refuse to accept it. And so this is the bishop's chair. And of course, there are old stories about this chair, which I don't think I would repeat them here. And this was St. Thomas Dealtree, during whose period this church, St. Thomas Church, was built. And this is another view of the church inside. And now the cemetery. The cemetery is behind the church, next to the church. And one interesting tombstone relates to one Josiah Goodwin, who was actually, he's explained as a journalist and a stenographer to Swami Vivekananda. It's very interesting that he was a stenographer to Vivekananda even before Vivekananda went to Chicago. So the implications, I think someone should study. And then we have a very, very impressive looking memorial for one Sir William Adam in the St. Thomas Cemetery, which is built with this black granite from Aberdeen in Ireland. He was a very highly placed person, so the government itself built it. Normally, the government agencies or organization, they did not offer to build any memorial for anybody, but this is very exceptional. And so the Adams Fountain in Charing Cross is also named after him. He was very highly connected in those days, in the company days. And now this is the Garrison Church, or what you call the Wellington Military Church in those days. This was actually built much later in 1885, though the military establishment was there for a very long period before that. And someone was trying to ask about the establishment of the barracks. So I think I would like to give very brief information about how this came to be developed. I think it was Sullivan himself who first promoted the idea of building a military base in Nilgiris. But during Sullivan's time, it was not taken up seriously. But later on, it was taken up seriously. And so the idea of building building a military garrison at Wellington. And the area belonged to Todas partly and Badagas partly. And then, the first cantoned unit of the British Army, they came to occupy the place in 1854. 1854. But even prior to that, the Europeans started using this place as a convalescent depot for soldiers from the plains of the then Madras Malabar Army from Kannanur as well as from other places. So they were using it as a convalescent depot. So about 700 convalescents were being treated in the convalescent depot in those days, before 1854. And even now, the main road leading from Wellington to Kannur is known as Depot Road. And then they came to establish this place after 1854. And because that was the time when the British were looking for a garrison, and so they decided to expand. They decided to make further expansions in this place. So the church was, idea for the church came up in 1862, but actually it came to be built only in 1889. What is very interesting about this church, of course, architecturally it's fine and all that, but then, finally the authorities, they approved the plans for a church, but then they were altered due to several controversies. And the most important one was that for nearly 3 years a controversy was going on, because the commandant was Englishman, and the superintending engineer was an Irishman, and the Irishman wanted the church to be built in Irish style, that is, altar on the northern side. And the British commandant wanted the church to be built in the English side with altar on the east. So for 3 years, they put their head together. And then eventually the church came to be constructed and consecrated in 1885. And the church contains the loftiest spire, the church tower in the whole of the district. So this is the outside appearance of Garrison Church. So the Garrison Church is also known for the memorial plaques for all those British soldiers who died. And this is the inside. And then they have an extensive cemetery also, the Garrison Church Cemetery. And there's the usual bell there. And Garrison Church also has an impressive pipe organ, which is even to this day being continually used. So this is important from that sense. Next to All Saints, Garrison is the only other church where this pipe organ in good, fine condition is still being used. And St. Mary's Church, Ooty. So these are all present-day buildings, but the original site came into being only after St. Stephen's Church. Only after St. Stephen's Church, a small chapel was built, which you can see from here, the behind. And important, it is Ooty also being the headquarters of the Catholic diocese. The one important thing is in the old church, I think in the altar is buried a visiting papal legate from Europe. So this is the second place where a church is built on a burial place. So these are the different photographs relating to church, but they are all very, very modern. So yeah, including the stained glass, they are very modern. The present-day cathedral is a much later one. So this was the original Catholic church called St. Mary's Church, built by the Catholics. Of course, the Catholics did not have any assistance coming from the company side or the establishment side. And so this was, the church was built when Nilgiris was part of Malabar district. This is, and now Wesley Church. Now this church, this also, because next to St. Mary's, Christ Church is another church where the founder lies buried, General Gibson. General Gibson lies buried in the altar of the church. So this is the altar and he lies buried there. And the Tamil congregation who are now worshipping, I think they had some sentimental attachment to the grave site being so open. So unfortunately, they, while renovating, they kind of decided to just close it in the sense without. But the church is it remains the style remains the same. The altar remains the same. The windows are the same. But when they were doing the other sort of renovations, they unfortunately covered up the grave site of General Gibson. And so this was the original. The road is still there. So because the original road from the plains to the hills, next to what Sullivan tried to trek through in his days, I think, and later on when he wanted an alternate road, so this was the road built by the Lieutenant McPherson, who built this road. And since this, the present day church site lay so close to this road, they decided to build a church here. So this road is still there in this state. It's not a properly maintained road. But if you come from Kotagiri, you reach Aravenu, and then you take up this road. You ascend this road. So this is still called Churchill Road, and this is I think road important from strategic points of view those days, because Sullivan 1819 he came, he used the road via Denard, and that's a different story. And then later on, so this road came to be used before the present day road, which was later expanded because there was a very, very large patch of wetland in Kotagiri, so they could not lay any road. And later on, they closed up, the British. They closed up the wetlands. I think you please note that, not others. They closed up the wetland and they built the road, the present-day Kotagiri road. And of course, this is St. Luke's Church, which now takes care of the Christ Church in Kotagiri. This was built in 1927, Luke's Church. What is interesting about this church is, because all the churches built during the European period, they came under the Indian ecclesiastical establishment of the Government of India. So they had very close connections with government departments. But this church is the only one. The European planters in Kotagiri, they decided not to approach the government. So they bought their own site and built this beautiful church in 1957. Originally, it was a polo ground, which is very close to Kotagiri Kota Temple and on the main road. So this was completed in 1927. This is again a very modern looking church, as you know, but the original church for the Badagas was built on this site in 1867, and later on it underwent renovations. 1867, but this was actually finally completed in 1941. So what is interesting about this is the Kota door. The Kota craftsmen were employed to make these roads, these doors. I think the design was supplied by the Germans, Basel German missions, but this was designed by the Kotas. Loudale is known for the famous English medium school in Nilgiris. It was originally started as a military school for military orphans and asylums. It's a very, very long story. And then they decided to came and established themselves there. And in 1912, they built this church for the use of the school. But after independence, I think they had to hand over the school to the CSA authorities because they were not able to run the church as a constituent of the school. This is also very beautifully built church. Of course, now it's a Tamil-speaking church with English services being held now and then. They also have a very extensive cemetery. So this is interior of the St. Lawrence School, Lawrence School Church. They also have a pipe organ now totally out of use for various reasons. And then this church is known as the Church of the Ascension. So it came into being in 1912. Presently, though within the school campus, I think the church is being managed by the Church of South India. Anything else? No, we have.
Yeah, Reverend. So that was excellent, Reverend Mulley. Thank you so much. The thing is, this for information. This talk has been recorded and we'll be uploading it in a while in our Intach Nilgiris YouTube channel. So be on the lookout. Because the point I was coming to make was, see, there's so much, like I said in the beginning, we have just barely, this has been basically been a touch and go affair, we are just kind of scratched the surface. There is so much more to be, understood about these churches. And in terms of, just in terms of the different, the history of the churches, Reverend Mulley said so much, I'm barely able to, it's a lot of, some have registered, some have not. I think it will require a couple of viewings of this talk for it to sink in. And we hope that in the future, Intach Nilgiris will be able to host Reverend Mulley again and with a much, probably with a much narrower focus, focusing on a couple of churches or a couple of Christian institutions, where we can dwell and dilate more. This has been a quick run through. And like I said, the idea from, I think, the talk which Reverend gave now, I think certain kind of, for personally, before I open the floor for others to, to come up with questions, Reverend, this is one of the things that was coming to my mind, when Ooty, like I said in the beginning, there's so many churches here, and Similarly, if you look at many of the hill stations in India, I mean, including Kodaikanal or Simla or Darjeeling, all these hill stations are also associated with churches, and so there have been studies on hill stations. Dane Kennedy's work comes to my mind, and they look at these hill stations as the colonial attempt to set up their own independent enclaves. High in the hills, undisturbed by by the situation in the plains, and so they could have their own society, a white English society in the hills, in the image of an English countryside. So I was just wondering if churches were also part of the same agenda, in the sense, okay, this could be a place where the Europeans could come and spend some time in isolation, so to speak, in prayer and meditation. Would that also explain the number of churches that we see in hill stations? Reverend?
In this presentation, I have not touched anything upon the German graves in KT, and also the graves which originally formed part of the Boyers camp in KT. I mean, it's a long, fascinating story. So there are other European tombs, probably which we need to look into in later times. So in the meanwhile, all the churches are open for anyone to come and go. But in what way specifically, we can relate these cemeteries or these graveyards to cater to the whatever you call of the visitors? I think it's a very difficult question to mention, because a lot of people come and visit and go. So in what way it can be promoted? But then again, if you want to promote it in that way, I think each church, each congregation, they have their own right to decide on these things. So I think no hierarchy can tell them you do this way or do that way. They will always say, now this is our church and this is our cemetery, and we know how to go about. And of course, the cemeteries, very difficult to maintain, because I think of the cemeteries, 90% of them we have no idea at all who are buried there, except for our own records, which are very good, where we have more than 7,500 on our list. But then, you see, the cemeteries in due course, and it's very difficult to find money to maintain them in the way the tourists want. Because cemeteries are not meant for tourist consumption. That is basic. And so for the old endowed cemeteries, before independence, the British High Commission used to give a contribution, and then that stopped it. And then some of the people who came to India and said, okay, we want to do something, and they formed a association called the British Association for Cemeteries in South Asia, BAXA. And somewhere here and there, they will make some contributions for building a compound wall and things like that. And then you see, a practical reason is, we cannot have full-time employees to look after the cemeteries, because the cemeteries are mostly away from town. And even if you say compare Kunur and Ooty, see, Kunur is more beautifully maintained than St. Stephen Church, Ooty. Churchyard is impressive in Kunur. But St. Stephen Church, though it's in the district of Cotton, is really not. I think, probably people won't like me saying that. But then, anyway, this is the problem. And then, when, sites like Tiger Hill Cemetery, away from the town, so you need to find a watchman, and, you need to find a housing for him and things like that. And of late, we have a lot of harassment from the tourist side, because Tiger Hill Cemetery at Kuno. See, we don't know who comes there or who don't come there. And they all sorts of vandalism still going on. It's not peculiar to Kuno. It's also same in Mumbai and Calcutta and also Bangalore. So you have a very pertinent question, but it's very difficult to answer just like that.
Okay, thank you. So there are quite a few participants here. So anybody, Professor Susan Vishwanathan has one question. She has keyed it here, but I much rather have Professor coming online and posing this before Reverend Mulley. Professor Susan?
Thank you for a very interesting talk. So I thought that...
just 1 minute, Professor. Reverend, are you able to hear her?
Hello?
Yeah. Morning.
Hello, nice to see you.
How are you?
I thought that the carving on the chair, the serpent, could reflect the saying of Jesus, "Be wise as serpents and innocent as doves," and that it would have been during a time of great controversy, as you said.
That is one of his sayings, but the serpent there on the bishop's chair, it relates to the promise given in Genesis.
Yeah.
Genesis. So it has nothing to do with. I think that is an old motif, which in some cases they followed. So the bishop sitting there, right, and putting his arms there. So that was the idea, and it is. I think as far as we can ascertain, there is no link between Jesus' sayings and the serpent there.
So the
Head
serpent...
of the church being the only redeemed community, we wanted to.
So the serpent appears as iconography both in this phrase, "Be wise as serpent and innocent as doves." So Jesus does say it, it is in the New Testament. And the same iconography is used also by Moses. So the idea that the healing power is present. So somewhere I think the notion that only the stereotyping of evil is present.
No, that's true, but it all depends on how do you go into the hermeneutics of it. But as far as the biblical passages are concerned, I don't think we can.
Also, Sullivan, you mentioned Sullivan. Is he the same Sullivan who brought potatoes to the hills?
Sullivan is the only Sullivan we know in Nilgiris, John Sullivan. Yeah.
So was he associated with the bringing in of potatoes?
Yes.
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Susan. So if anybody has anything to say, any query, clarifications, doubts, you are at liberty to unmute yourself and come online. We'll wait for some responses. So that was actually a very fascinating talk, Reverend. Thank you so much. And yeah, so we have Carl Ebenezer online. Carl, you're able to copy us?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, very well. Yeah, please.
Okay, great. Hello, team. Hi, this is Carl Ebenezer from Bangalore. I've been in Ooty as well. I studied in Ooty and moved to Bangalore now. My question to the team earlier was if there's a book on this, and I think there's a professor who's writing on that. So I just want to kind of reiterate that, because I think the curator of this talk said that Reverend Mulley is the right person to write a book or an essay on the historical perspective on the church and its impact here in Nilgiris. So just wanted the thoughts of Reverend Mulley on this. I mean, is there some papers that you have written which you plan to consolidate as a book, or do you have any plans like that in the future? Just wanted.
I've written a lot on churches and schools.
Okay, from historical perspective, is it
compiled or available, just like that?
Okay.
In case you are specifically interested in any aspect, I am prepared to give you the details, but I don't think I have the time to publish or things like that.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to kind of know from the historical perspective. I think what you shared now was pretty interesting, and I wanted just a little bit more details about the same.
Yeah, any more information, please feel free to contact me.
How do I contact you, please?
Yeah, you can, Carl, you can send a mail to Intach Nilgiris@gmail.com. You can Intach Nilgiris, INTACH NILGIRIS, Intach Nilgiris@gmail.com. You can just leave a message for us. We'll forward that to Reverend Mulley along with your email ID, and later you can be in touch. Incidentally, Reverend, like I started off, I know in my introduction, he's a man of encyclopedic learning. So there are, the number of papers that he has published on different aspects of Nilgiris, you name it. Let it be Nilgiris natural landscape, its flora, fauna, the culture, people, anthropology. Professor Anthony Walker is also here. He's one of the leading anthropologist and sociologist on Nilgiris, and I think he will bear me out when I say so. Any study on Nilgiris, Professor Reverend Mulley is the entry point. Any serious anyone who's serious about understanding the Nilgiris history, its culture, its politics, its flora and fauna. And the other thing about Reverend, we have several scholars on Nilgiris, like Professor Walker himself. He has done a lot of work on the Toda communities here. And then we have Professor Paul Hawkins, who has worked extensively on the Badaga community. So we also have our own from Nilgiris, Dr. Tarun Chabra, who once again has worked extensively with the Todas. But Professor Mulley, Reverend Mulley is someone who, he where all these studies converges. If you want really a synoptic, a comprehensive view, I think if that's what, unfortunately, he has not put any of his talks and papers as a book, and that's one of the agendas many of his well-wishers here we are having for ourselves. If you go through his, if you're able to lay your hands on some of his works, his papers and talks, you'll be richly rewarded. So do be in touch. Do send us a mail. I'll forward it to Reverend Mulley, and then from there you can take matters from there. And next time you're in Nilgiris, to make it a point to call on him too.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you. So so if there are, so there is one question, Reverend, from one Gomati Venkateshwar.
Fine.
This is not really pertinent to your talk, but nevertheless, since she has participated in our talk, and I think it's only fair that I entertain this question. See, so she's talking about the Todas community. Even today, I think the upper reaches of the botanical garden, you see one settlement. And so she's asking if I think what she means is, where the Toda community, did they leave the botanical gardens on their own to other sites, or were they made to leave? This is from Gomati Venkateshwar.
Anthony Walker is there on the line, but then I think when the government acquired these lands in those days, I think they just gave up the portions. Government did acquire, Sullivan acquired, and people like McIver acquired, and McPherson acquired, and even that Captain Underwood who built the church, they acquired a lot of lands. And I think the most, what I should say, the most known within quotes who acquired it was the person, who built the Ooty Club later. So, I think, see, they did not realize what this acquirement had in store for them.
Right.
So that's a different question altogether. But
Yeah. But anyway, since she raised it here, I would, is Professor Walker, are you there?
I'm there. Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can hear you.
I'm trying to work out the technology of how to get a message through. But if you can hear me, can you see me or not?
I'm trying to enable your video. We can hear you. Anyway, you can ask your. You can ask your question. Yeah.
No, first in answer to that question about Toda Hamlet atop the Botanical Gardens, the area which is now Utakaman municipality, there were 12 different Toda villages on that site before Sullivan came, and all of them were lost. One of them belonged to, except for one belonging to a clan known as Melgash, which is the name, which the head hamlet is the one above the Botanic Garden. They had one. The other 11, I think it is 11, belong to a clan known as Kash, and they are the clan whose headquarters is opposite the Savoy Hotel now, popularly known as Kandalmand, I think. In Toda, it's called Ishkiti these days. Those two have survived, but 12 of them were lost. So that village that the lady was asking about managed to retain its hamlet on top of the Botanic Gardens. And it's been there ever since, and it was there before, of Sullivan, of course.
Okay.
Anyway, to Professor Mulley, thank you.
Hello, Anthony.
Thanks for a very interesting talk. Of course, I wanted to ask whether in your studies of the churches, you have done research on the less well-known but ethnically important churches, like the two Toda Christian churches, for example.
See, we have not included all the churches, so I think they had to be left out.
But
we have our sources of information. We have not included them in this presentation.
Yeah, right. Well,
right.
Probably that's best.
Yeah, well, you know that very well.
But there are these two still existing Christian Toda churches, which you know all about, All Souls at the Toda colony, Timud as it's known in Toda, and Christ Church in Paymud, which was the earliest of the Toda churches, founded in, consecrated in 1924, I think. And the main church at the Toda colony, Timud, was consecrated in 1928. So they are quite old churches and clearly have quite a lot to tell.
Yeah, we did not include because, for example, the Kotagiri church we showed, that's 1867, mainly meant for Badagas, and even to this day continues to be Badaga dominated, and also the Kechi church and the magnificent work that really rose from those stations. I think it's difficult to include every church and every mission.
I mean, are there small ethnic based churches? There must be in other Christian communities belonging
not in Nilgiris. Not in Nilgiris.
Not in the Nilgiris. I mean, I'm thinking of Badiga village.
Nilgiris only Todas and Badagas.
The Badigas there are Badiga churches in Badiga villages, are there?
You see, not in that sense, but Kotagiri was a parent church. The believers there, they are spread out in all villages, and so also Keti, and we have Thune and Kalati, and it's a very expanded community. I mean, we did not want to include all those data, so we had to cut down on that count.
Anyway, thank you very much for your talk, and
thank you,
searching.
Thank you, Professor Walker. If there are any further questions, we can take up online, or we will bring the session to the close. But before that, Ms. Geeta Srinivasan, our patron, Intach Nilgiris, I would request her to come online and propose the vote of thanks, and also share a thing or two about the work done by Intach Nilgiris over the last 20 years and more. Geeta ma'am, you're there? Hello. I think I see her online, but I'm asking her to unmute. There she is.
Okay.
Hello, Geeta ma'am. Welcome.
My husband is also there, Dr.
Yeah,
Emma.
Doctor, welcome, doctor.
Thank you.
He can be
So
seated.
last week, Dr. Vasantham, he gave a very evocative and interesting audiovisual presentation on the colonial inheritance of the Nilgiris. In the case of Kunur, today we have been honored by the presence of Reverend Philip Mulley, a great scholar, chronicler of Nilgiris history, Christianity, anthropology, who gave us a wonderful talk on the churches of Nilgiris, their histories, legacies, and heritage. One realizes what a rich architectural heritage has been left to us and how incumbent it is on us to preserve this great heritage. Thank you to Keystone Foundation for providing the technical facilities, and all our participants who came out with very interesting questions, and the answers given by Reverend were really very unique and very interesting. And of course, our dynamic duo, Samantha and Krishna, who have participated. And I don't know if Professor Anthony Walker can see me, but hello to him wherever he is. We are happy that he also took part in today's proceedings. The Nilgiris is one of our unique places in the world, which is rich in architectural, tribal, cultural, and natural heritage. Unfortunately, with population pressure and indiscriminate tourism, this heritage is now under great threat. And Intach Nilgiris has worked over the years to promote awareness and the ways and means of preserving this heritage. Intach's mission to conserve heritage is based on the belief that living in harmony with heritage enhances the quality of life. And it is a duty of every citizen of India as laid down in the Constitution of our country. A membership organization, today Intach is recognized as one of the world's largest heritage organizations with over 200 chapters across our country. One of the best ways to promote awareness is through education, and what better than imparting training to our teachers through our teachers training workshops. These workshops are held to motivate teachers to play a more effective role in sensitizing children about heritage and encourage them to form heritage clubs in their own schools. To promote heritage education, My City, My Heritage campaign was held in Ooty, where over 400 children from classes 6 to 9 took part in an essay writing and poster making competition. Held mainly for government and government-aided schools, children wrote in both English and Tamil, and you will be happy to know that over the years, we've had quite a few regional winners from our district. As former convener of Intach Nilgiris chapter and trustee Ooty Literature Festival, over the past few years, we've held successful festivals, which unfortunately came to a halt this year due to COVID-19. Apart from restoring the iconic Nilgiri Library, we've helped to restore the Ladies Club, a century-old building, and also released a book, Nilgiris, A Guide to the Built Heritage of Ooty Kunur, authored by Dr. Suresh, State Convener for Tamil Nadu. A major restoration work was done by the chapter. This is the restoration of the wardrobe room and the heritage library in the Nilgiris Library, and the placing of heritage boards in English and Tamil in many prominent places in Ooty. One of the projects of former collector Supriya Sahu was involved in was the renovation of the John Sullivan bungalow in Kaneri-Mukku, the first ever modern building that came up in the Nilgiris. It was built by John Sullivan, who set foot in Kotagiri in 1819. This laid the foundation for the development of the Nilgiris. Some years ago, when Dr. Shankar was collector, he wanted to install a bust of Sullivan in the premises. I still remember how, along with Mr. Radhakrishnan and Mr. Alvas, we were in the studio in Chennai, in the artist studio, trying to bring a close resemblance as he was working on the clay model. At the same time, Mr. Shankar was on the mobile finding out about the progress. The bust was installed on the 227th anniversary of John Sullivan, along with the inauguration of Sullivan Park. Recently, we heard about the restoration of Stone House in the Government Arts College, and one hopes that the original plan is retained and the renovation is done with the original lime and mortar. To commemorate the oak tree planted by Sullivan in his memory, we would like to suggest that we get more oak saplings and maybe as an Intach project, distribute them in prominent places in the district. I'm sure this is a better way of remembering Sullivan. Then my great fear is that the PWD might get into this restoration. So I think we should also hold a workshop on how lime and mortar is the original material, and that should be used in most of these heritage buildings. One of the ideas mooted by Intach, which was successfully implemented, was the conversion of Connemara House into the Government Museum. Originally, the principal's Government Arts College residence, Lord Macaulay is supposed to have resided in the house during his stay in Ooty. We have closely worked with Dr. Tarun Chabra and took part in the release of his book, The Toda Landscape, a definitive work on the Toda tribe. Ramachandra Guha, eminent author, was a chief guest, and the first copy was received by a Toda elder in the presence of Dr. Srinivasan, who's also a member of Intach Nilgiris. Intach Nilgiris chapter also sponsored a talk by Mr. Christopher Penn, author and historian from England. The subject was Uttakaman, the Nilgiris and its people, caught in the lens of A.T.W. Penn, 1849-1924. And I think we also saw his graveyard, his gravestone in the Reverend Mulley's presentation. Apart from book releases, we have renowned art historians like Dr. Chudamani Nandagopal, who gave an audiovisual presentation on the life and times of Raja Ravi Verma. Padma Shri awardee Dr. Sharda Srinivasan, member Intach, also gave a talk on the metallurgical heritage of the Nilgiris. As convener Intach and trustee assembly rooms, we inaugurated the SM Cine Museum. It showcases the two 60-year-old Bayer projectors made in Germany, film reels, spools, film rewinding table, and other accessories of a bygone area, and is a place to visit for cinema buffs. Not many of you may know that Nobel laureate Gurudev Rabindranath Tagore spent 15 days in the Blue Mountains from 21st January to 5th February 1919 as a guest of renowned industrialist Ambalal Sarabhai. To celebrate the 150th birth anniversary, Intach, along with other organizations, arranged for a function, and the highlight of the evening was the exhibition of Gurudev's ancestral home, Vishwa Bharati, family members, and his sketches and paintings. We have been in the forefront to declare the Nilgiri Mountain Railway as a World Heritage Site and taken part in many of the preliminary meetings. We have had seminars on fragile ecosystems and tried our level best to bring about the Environmental Protection Act for the whole of Nilgiris, but unfortunately, this has not happened. We have also prevented the demolition of the High Court and the MacIver Fern House in the Botanical Gardens. While I have given you a few instances of various aspects of the work done by the Nilgiris chapter. There are only a few of the aspects, there are many more, but we have also done a lot of work with government and government-aided schools and in the vernacular medium. Some time ago, we brought out this book in Tamil, Mare Neer Aruvade Oru Kaiyedu. This was sponsored by the Rotary Club of Nilgiris West and Intach Nilgiris. This book is in Tamil and it talks about rainwater harvesting, and this was distributed amongst the school children and schools, both government and government-aided schools. And Intach Delhi has printed many of these pamphlets, which is Kadaigalin Kadai. These are in Tamil. These are used as teaching aids for government schools and government-aided schools. குழந்தைகளின் மொழி வளர்ச்சிக்கு கதையை பயன்படுத்த சில வழிமுறைகள். This is on the pronunciation for children and how to teach them. This also we have been distributing to government-aided schools. And we have helped, along with the Rotary Club of Nilgiris West, to put up smart boards in the government schools in Mavanella and Bokkapuram. One of the great advantages of Intach is, unlike other organizations, we work with other NGOs and we try to be facilitators and resource people and offer help when needed. Too many NGOs work in isolation and they're unable to make any impact. As William Blake said, to see the world in a grain of sand, our precious Nilgiris is like a grain of sand. We see the whole world in the culture, architecture, and the people here. They're from so many different places, so many different organizations, and so many different kind of tribes, and it's such a colorful mosaic. So I would finally like to end with asking many of you to become members of Intach and help us to preserve this grain of sand, our precious Nilgiris. Thank you. Finally, before I forget, we have also brought out this Uttakaman Heritage Trail. This was to commemorate when in our own post office, as a heritage post office, appeared in one of the stamps. So this was done to commemorate that event, and this is on the Uttakaman Heritage Trail. And very soon, we in Intach will be bringing out a similar pamphlet on Heritage Trail in Kunur. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Geeta ma'am, for succinctly putting together the work of Intach over the last 25 years and more. One would see, so much has been done, and a lot of this was done when you were helming Intach much before we were members of Intach, and before you passed on the baton to us. So thank you very much, Geeta ma'am, and everyone who took the trouble of joining us today. Thanks a lot for joining us, and your presence and in such good numbers is deeply encouraging. We will continue to have these talks in the days to come. Next Sunday, we are having a talk by Ms. Ramya Reddy on the pre-colonial or the indigenous heritage communities and their heritage of Nilgiris. So that will be next Sunday. I'll be sharing the invite and the flyer soon. Be on the lookout. People who have any other doubts or who are eager to join us, Samantha has just left a message in the chat box. Please do mail us, intachnilgiris@gmail.com. Do follow us on our Instagram account. That is Intach@Nilgiris on Instagram. Like Geeta ma'am said, there is a lot to be done. And this is something I mentioned even earlier in the previous talk. Particularly documenting Nilgiris heritage, bringing about awareness, and also intervening very meaningfully and selectively to sustain the cultural, both the cultural and natural heritage of the Nilgiris. There are already several organizations we are right now at Keystone. I also use this before I forget to thank Keystone for helping us out in this talk, particularly the technical matters. Network is a big if in Nilgiris. Being a hilly terrain, not everywhere network access is possible. So they were sweet enough to offer their premises for this particular talk by Reverend Mulley. So thanks Keystone, thanks in particular to Faisal and Ranjani of Keystone. So yeah, so there are organizations like Keystone, and there is Dr. Vasantan's own organization, Clean Kunur, which are working in different domains. So Intach, particularly, our agenda is to work on the cultural domain, and we need your support too. And we need everybody's support who feels very deeply concerned and about the state of affairs in Nilgiris. So let's join hands, let's work together, and let's make Nilgiris, it is already, it has a legacy, it has its heritage, but there has been an onslaught, commerce, tourism, so we need to intervene and intervene carefully, intervene meaningfully. And that is only possible when we join hands and work collectively. So thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining us. So next Sunday, we will be hosting another talk, and be on the lookout for the flyer. Thanks a lot.
Appa.